Before we begin, let me tell you something about the world Olivia grew up in. In the wolf kingdoms of the northern ridges, your worth was written in your bones, specifically in the wolf sleeping inside them. Every man, woman, and child of werewolf blood carried a wolf spirit. It howled on full moons. It sharpened your senses. It chose your mate. Without it, you were nothing, less than nothing. You were wolfless. And in a world where pack hierarchy determined everything, your home, your safety, your right to be seen, being wolfless meant being invisible. Or worse, being a target. Olivia Vayne had been both since the day she turned 18, and her wolf never came. She was 22 the first time Alpha King Jack ever truly noticed her. She just didn't know it yet. Olivia moved through her sword form alone, the way she always did. After the other warriors had gone home, after the training yard had emptied, after there was no one left to laugh, her form was clean, precise. She had spent 4 years perfecting it, learning to compensate for everything the wolf inside her refused to give. No enhanced speed, no heightened instincts, no second soul lending her strength. Just her. Her blade sang through the low evening air, left diagonal, pivot, thrust, recover. She paused to catch her breath, pressing the back of her wrist to her forehead. A small habit, one she'd had since childhood, the way some people touched a lucky charm before something difficult. She didn't realize she did it. She never did. Behind her, across the ridge overlooking the training grounds, a man stood still among his royal escort. He watched her without speaking. Alpha King Jack Aurelian, 28, broad-shouldered, and carrying a silence that made grown wolves lower their eyes, said nothing to the men beside him. He simply watched the wolfless girl below, alone in the fading amber light, running her drills for the 4th time that evening. His jaw tightened. He looked away. She was still sweaty from training when her sister found her. Maria Vayne was everything Olivia was not, or so the pack believed. 2 years older, wolf-strong, born with a silver-tipped wolf that made alpha males pay attention. She had their mother's cheekbones and their father's cruelty, arranged on a face that smiled often and meant it rarely. She leaned against Olivia's doorframe now, looking her up and down with the slow pleasure of someone inspecting something broken. "You're still doing that?" It wasn't a question. Olivia set her blade against the wall without turning around. Doing what? Pretending. A beat. Olivia pulled her training wrap loose and said nothing. "The royal moon gathering is in 3 days," Maria continued, examining her nails. "Prince Davies will be there. Half the unmated women in the kingdom will be there." She finally looked up. "You know what won't be there?" Olivia's shoulders stiffened. Maria smiled. "Your wolf." The word landed the way it always did. Not loud, not violent. Quiet, surgical. Maria had perfected the art of wounds that didn't bleed immediately. "I'm aware," Olivia said. "Are you? Because you still train like you're planning to be somebody." Maria tilted her head, and something cold crossed her expression. "Nobody wants you, Olivia. You understand that, right? Not the pack, not a mate, certainly not Prince Davies." She straightened from the doorframe. "Nobody ever will." She left before Olivia could answer, not that Olivia had one. She stood in the middle of her room, the silence pressing around her like something physical, and breathed. In, out. In, out. She had learned long ago not to cry where the walls could remember it. She crossed to her small window. Below, the pack grounds stretched toward the forest, wolves laughing in groups, paired off, whole in ways she couldn't be. She pressed 2 fingers to the glass and watched them. Nobody wants you. It wasn't the first time she'd heard it. It wouldn't be the last. But something about tonight made it heavier. Maybe because she had almost believed, for one fragile, foolish moment, that this year might be different. That she might be different. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. That was when the knock came. Not from the door, from downstairs. The official kind. Formal. 3 measured strikes. She heard the housekeeper's voice, heard the rustle of an envelope changing hands, and then her name, called up the stairs in a tone she had never once heard directed at her. Surprise. Olivia descended slowly. The housekeeper stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding a sealed envelope of deep midnight blue, stamped with gold wax in the shape of a crown and a crescent moon intertwined. The royal seal. Her name was written on the front in bold, formal script. Miss Olivia Vayne. Personal invitation. The Royal Moon Gathering. She stared at it for a long moment, then she took it from the housekeeper's hands, turned it over once, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, something she had almost forgotten the shape of. Hope. Nobody had ever handed Olivia Vayne an invitation before. Not to anything that mattered. She didn't yet know who had sent it. She didn't yet know that the man who watched her train that evening, the man with the steady jaw and the quiet eyes and the silence that made wolves step back, had sent it himself. She didn't know any of that yet, but she held the envelope like something precious, in a room still echoing with her sister's cruelty. And for one small, stubborn moment, she let herself believe she deserved to open it. The Royal Moon Gathering was held at Aurelian Palace, the kind of place that made ordinary wolves forget how to breathe. Torchlight ran the length of every colonnade. Silver banners hung between marble columns, each one stamped with the crescent and crown seal of the kingdom. The courtyard alone could swallow 3 pack grounds whole, and it was filled, absolutely filled, with the kind of people who had never once questioned whether they belonged. Olivia had questioned it approximately 40 times since arriving at the gate. She had worn her best dress, deep blue, modest, clean at the hem. It had felt like enough when she left the house. Standing now at the edge of the courtyard, surrounded by women draped in silk, and wolves whose auras pressed against her skin like warm weather, it felt like a polite joke. She found a column near the fountain and stood close to it. Not hiding, just close to something solid. She heard Maria before she saw her. "I honestly don't know why she came." Maria's voice, pitched at precisely the volume that carries. She was speaking to Lady Fenella, one of the Pack Council's daughters, someone whose approval Maria had been collecting for years. An invitation must have gone out by error. The palace staff can be careless. Lady Fenella glanced at Olivia, then away, the kind of dismissal that takes less than a second. Olivia's grip tightened on the cup in her hand. She counted her breaths. 1, 2. She had gotten very good at this, at building a small, quiet room inside herself, where Maria's voice couldn't reach. She was building it now, brick by careful brick. "You look like you're solving a difficult equation." She turned. Prince Davies Aurelian stood a foot away, watching her with something warm in his expression, amused, but not unkindly. He was exactly as handsome as the stories said, sandy-haired, broad-jawed, with his father's old military bearing softened by a younger man's easy smile. Olivia blinked. "Your Highness, you're Olivia Vayne." He said it like a statement, but his eyes asked a question. "I am. I've seen you train." He tilted his head. "Your left diagonal is cleaner than half my royal guard." She didn't know what to do with that. She almost pressed her wrist to her forehead, caught herself, curled her fingers instead. "I've had time to practice." Something in that answer made him go quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable, quiet, thoughtful. "Walk with me," he said. They walked the length of the eastern garden while the gathering hummed behind them. He asked her questions, not polite questions, the kind people use to fill silence, but real ones. What did she train for? What did she read? What did she want if the world had offered her something other than what it had? She answered carefully at first, then less carefully. She told him about the sword forms, about the old strategy text she'd found in her father's library, about the way the forest looked at dawn when the mist sat low between the trees and everything smelled like cold pine and possibility. He listened. He actually listened. She hadn't had a conversation like this since... She couldn't remember since when. When they returned to the courtyard, the gathering had shifted into its formal portion, nobles arranged in a wide arc before the palace steps. Davies guided her through the crowd with one hand lightly at her back. She felt eyes track them, heard the murmur begin. At the top of the steps, on a throne of dark stone and silver inlay, Alpha King Jack sat watching. He always seemed to be watching, Olivia realised distantly. Still, like a man who had learned that patience was its own kind of power. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. She looked away first. Davies stopped at the centre of the courtyard. The crowd quieted naturally. He had that effect, that easy gravity that made people orient toward him without realising it. "I want to say something," his voice carried effortlessly, "about the upcoming moon-claiming ceremony." Olivia stood 2 steps behind him. She wasn't sure why he'd asked her to stay close. Then he turned and extended his hand to her, open, palm up, in front of every noble, every pack representative, every eye in the courtyard. "I intend to choose Olivia Vayne." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the courtyard erupted. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. She heard the murmuring cascade into open whispers. "The wolfless girl. He can't be serious. Doesn't she have..." And underneath all of it, one sharp sound she recognised without looking. Maria. Inhaling like she'd been struck, she took Davies' hand because her body moved before her mind caught up. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, and he smiled at her like this was the most natural thing in the world, like she deserved to be standing here. Her chest did something complicated and overwhelming. "Is this real?" she thought. "Is any of this real?" High on the palace steps, Alpha King Jack did not move. He watched his brother hold the wolfless girl's hand, watched the crowd react, watched Olivia's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and something fragile and luminous that might, in better circumstances, become joy. His jaw worked once. Then he stood, smoothed the front of his jacket, and descended the steps at a measured pace that parted the crowd without effort. The gathering ended. Nobles drifted. Olivia was separated from Davies by a wave of well-wishers, some genuine, most simply curious, and she was still trying to find her footing when she noticed Davies and Jack standing together near the garden archway. She was too far to hear, but she saw it clearly. Jack leaned slightly toward his brother and said something quiet. Davies' easy smile faltered. He glanced at the ground. The older brother straightened and walked away. Davies stood alone for a moment, and the look on his face was not the look of a man who had just made a joyful public declaration. It was the look of a man who had just been asked a question he wasn't sure he could answer. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she had imagined the shadow that crossed his face. She had spent her whole life being invisible. She wasn't going to talk herself out of the first moment anyone had ever reached for her hand. The week that followed was the closest Olivia had ever come to a different life. She was measured for ceremony clothes. She was introduced, cautiously, provisionally, to Davies' household staff. She was addressed as Miss Vayne instead of the wolfless one, which was, she reflected, a significant improvement. She trained every morning, same as always, sword forms at dawn. But now she did them with something new living in her chest, a small, persistent warmth that she kept checking on the way you check a candle flame in a draft. Still burning, still there. She allowed herself, in those quiet mornings, to imagine it. Davies had promised to meet her in the eastern garden at midday. She arrived early, another habit. She sat on the low stone wall near the roses and waited. She had brought a book, a battered copy of Northern Ridge's military history that she'd read 3 times already, and she turned pages without reading them, watching the garden entrance. Midday came. Davies didn't. She waited another hour. She told herself he was busy. He was a prince. Princes had things. She walked home alone with her unread book and the candle flame guttering slightly in her chest. That night, Maria appeared in her doorway again, but this time she didn't say anything. She just smiled, and somehow that was worse. She heard it from a merchant's daughter who clearly hadn't seen her standing there. Lady Isabella arrived yesterday from the coastal kingdom. You should see her. Jack brought her in personally, apparently. The prince hasn't left her side since the welcome dinner. Olivia set down the herb bundle she'd been holding, dried lavender, which she bought every week and consistently forgot to use, leaving small purple bundles around her room like accidental decorations, and walked out of the stall before her face could betray her. She kept walking until she found a quiet side street. Then she stood against a wall and breathed. He hasn't left her side. She told herself it meant nothing. She was getting quite good at telling herself things. She saw them together for the first time at a dinner she'd been formally invited to, one of the pre-ceremony gatherings that she was apparently now expected to attend as Davies intended. Lady Isabella was everything the merchant's daughter had promised. Dark-haired, wolf-strong, with an aura that filled a room pleasantly rather than oppressively. She laughed easily and touched people's arms when she spoke to them, and seemed genuinely interested in whatever anyone said to her. Olivia wanted to dislike her. She found she couldn't. What she could dislike, what she stood across the room watching with a cold, careful sensation spreading through her chest, was the way Davies leaned toward Isabella when she spoke, the way he laughed at something she said, louder than he'd laughed at anything in Olivia's presence, the way his eyes followed her when she moved away. He looks at her the way I thought he was looking at me. She didn't realize she'd gone still until a voice appeared beside her. Quiet, even, close enough to be private. "You should eat something. The lamb is better than it looks." She turned. Alpha King Jack stood beside her, not looking at the crowd but at the table, as though he'd simply wandered over to assess the food options. He had a glass of dark wine in one hand and the particular stillness of a man who was never actually not paying attention. She blinked. "I'm not hungry." "You trained for 2 hours this morning." He finally glanced at her, brief, assessing. "You're hungry." She opened her mouth, closed it. He picked up a small plate, added lamb and bread with the efficient movements of someone who was doing a task, not a kindness, and held it out without ceremony. She took it. They stood in silence for a moment. Around them, the dinner hummed and sparkled. Across the room, Isabella said something and Davies laughed again. "She's from the coastal kingdom," Olivia said, before she could stop herself. "She is," Jack said. "She's very..." Olivia searched for a word that wasn't unkind. "Compelling." "Yes." A pause. "Is she why you told Davies to be certain?" She hadn't meant to ask that either. She looked at her plate, bracing. But Jack didn't deflect. He turned his glass once in his hand, a slow rotation, a small tell, and said, "I asked him to be certain because certainty matters, in a claim more than anywhere." "Did he answer you?" Jack looked across the room at his brother. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it went very quiet. "Not yet," he said. She went home that night and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. Then she pressed her wrist to her forehead, her oldest habit, her small private ritual, and looked at nothing. The candle flame wasn't out, but it was very, very small. She told herself she would ask Davies directly. She didn't get the chance. The next evening, returning from the market with her forgotten lavender, she took the shortcut through the palace's east wing gardens. She heard his voice first, then silence. Then she turned the corner and stopped. Davies and Isabella stood beneath the white trellis, and he was tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with the gentleness of a man who had stopped being careful about being seen. Olivia didn't make a sound. She turned around and walked home. She didn't run. She didn't let herself run. The moon-claiming ceremony was the oldest tradition in the wolf kingdoms. Under the full moon, before the gathered people, an alpha would call forward the one he had chosen. He would speak her name. He would present his mark, the crescent pressed to her wrist, and from that moment, they were bound. It was not simply a wedding. It was a declaration of worth. Olivia had understood this since childhood. She understood it now, standing in the ceremony grove in her pale silver dress, with 200 wolves gathered in a circle around the altar stone, and the moon rising fat and cold above the northern ridge. She had come anyway. She wasn't sure what that said about her. Stubborn, her father had called it, when he was alive, and something like kind. Delusional, Maria would say. She stood near the back of the gathered circle and breathed slowly, watching the altar, telling herself she was prepared for whatever happened. She was not prepared. Davies walked to the altar at the ceremony's formal opening, and she made herself watch him. He was dressed in the white and gold of the royal house. He looked like a prince. He looked right here, in this circle, beneath this moon. He did not look at her, not once in the processional, not when the elder began the formal words. not when the crowd settled into reverent quiet and every face in the circle turned forward. Olivia's heart beat very steadily. She noted this as a detached observation. Very steady, very cold. The elder's voice rose into the night air. Under the full moon, witnessed by this pack and this kingdom, who does the prince's wolf choose? Davies straightened. He spoke clearly, calmly, in a voice that carried to every corner of the grove. A future Luna must be strong enough to lead beside me. She must carry a wolf of her own, to anchor the bond, to carry the pack's future in her blood. A pause. I cannot claim a mate who carries no wolf. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Olivia had ever heard. Because he didn't say a name. He didn't need to. The entire circle understood who he was not claiming. She felt it like cold water, slow, then everywhere at once. The people nearest her began to turn, quietly, carefully, the way people look at disasters at a respectful distance. She stood completely still. Don't move. Don't give them more than this. Don't. Years of it hit her at once. Every training yard that emptied when she arrived, every dinner table that went quiet, every time Maria smiled from a doorway, every merchant's daughter who hadn't seen her standing there, every whisper of wolfless, broken, nobody. It crashed down on her like something structural collapsing, but she did not move. She stood in her silver dress under the full moon, and she did not flinch, and she did not cry. And that was the only thing in the world she had control over right now, so she held it with both hands. Then Maria stepped forward from the circle. Maria moved to the inside of the circle, with the unhurried confidence of someone who had been waiting a long time for this exact moment. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She actually believed it. Maria looked at Olivia with something that might have been pity if it weren't so pleased with itself. She trained every day. She starved herself of sleep. She genuinely thought. A small laugh. Nobody wants you, Olivia. I told you. The circle was quiet. Some faces looked away. A few looked curious. A very small number looked uncomfortable. Not enough of them. Nobody, Maria said again, softer, ever will. Olivia's chin stayed level, her nails pressed into her palms, and she thought with extraordinary clarity, I will not fall apart in front of them. Not tonight. Not here. She pulled in a breath and prepared, in the way she had prepared for 4 years of empty training yards, to simply walk away with whatever dignity she could carry. She was turning to leave when the aura hit. It came without warning. Not a sound, not a movement, just presence. The kind of presence that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to something older, deeper, the part of every wolf that recognized power not by sight, but by instinct. Every head in the circle turned. Every wolf went still. Alpha King Jack Aurelian rose from his seat at the ceremony's edge. He had been there the whole time, positioned to one side, formally present as was customary for the Alpha King, expected to observe and not intervene. He walked into the circle with the same measured pace he used to descend palace steps. Deliberate, unhurried, the walk of a man who had never once needed to rush to matter. The crowd parted for him before he reached them. He didn't look at Davies. He didn't look at Maria. He walked directly to Olivia. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. And she saw him, really saw him, perhaps for the first time. Not as the throne behind his brother's warmth, not as the watching figure at the edge of every gathering, but as a man who had made a decision and arrived at it with total clarity. His voice was quiet, but the ceremony grove swallowed every other sound. My brother cannot claim her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, because she was never meant to belong to him. The silence stretched across 200 wolves. Olivia's heart had stopped doing anything predictable at all. Jack held out his hand, the same gesture Davies had made in the palace courtyard, but different in every way that mattered. Davies' hand had been an invitation. Jack's was something older, something that felt less like an offer and more like a recognition, like he was not choosing her so much as finally admitting what had already been true. Olivia Vayne, he said. Only that. Her name, like it was enough, like it had always been enough. She stared at his hand. She thought about 4 years of empty training yards, about lavender she kept forgetting, about a candle flame she'd been protecting since the palace courtyard, through every cold evening, every sister's smile, every public silence. She thought about a man who had brought her a plate of food and stood beside her without making it mean anything except, "You should eat," and I noticed. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, certain, no performance in it. The ceremony grove exploded. She heard it distantly, the crowd, the voices, someone near the back openly crying out, but the noise felt far away, muffled, like sound heard from underwater, because Jack had turned her wrist gently upward, and the elder was moving forward with the ceremony mark, and the ancient crescent pressed to her skin carried a heat that started at the surface and went, impossibly, shockingly, deep, all the way to somewhere she had believed for 4 years was simply empty. She gasped. Jack felt it too. She saw it in the fractional stillness that crossed his face. Not surprise, exactly. More like a man who had suspected something for a long time and was now watching it confirmed. His eyes found hers. Whatever he saw in her face, it made something in his expression unlock. Just barely, just at the edges. But she saw it, there, behind the stillness, behind the patience and the quiet authority and the careful distance he kept from everything and everyone. Something that had been waiting. Behind her, she heard Maria make a sound she had never heard her sister make before. Not cruelty, not laughter. Fear. The kingdom would talk about this night for years. The ceremony where a prince refused a wolfless girl and a king claimed her instead. Some would call it politics. Some would call it spectacle. The very few who were standing close enough to see Jack's face when the mark took hold, close enough to see the way his shoulders shifted, like a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying alone for a very long time. Those people called it something else. But Olivia didn't know what any of them were calling it yet, because something had awakened inside her. Something old, something enormous, something that pressed against the inside of her chest with the warm insistence of something that had always been there, only sleeping, and it opened one eye. The palace was large enough that a person could, theoretically, spend an entire day inside it without encountering another living soul. Olivia spent her first 3 days testing this theory. She was not hiding. She was orienting. There was a difference, she told herself. One was fear, the other was strategy. She explored her wing in the mornings, trailing her fingers along stone walls, learning the difference between corridors that led somewhere and corridors that looped back on themselves. She found a library on the second floor that smelled like old paper and beeswax candles. She found a window seat on the east side that caught the dawn light at exactly the right angle. She brought her lavender bundles and left them on the windowsill, because apparently old habits survived political upheaval. Jack she saw at mealtimes, briefly. He was always in the middle of something: advisors, correspondents, petitioners who arrived at palace gates with grievances ranging from border disputes to missing livestock. He moved through all of it with the same contained, unhurried competence. He did not pressure her to be anywhere or do anything. She noticed this. She also noticed that every morning, without announcement, there was fresh bread and black tea outside her door, not delivered by staff. The staff used a tray. This was simply there, set on the floor, still warm. She didn't ask, but she started leaving the door cracked open. She was halfway through a history of the ancient moon pacts when she became aware she wasn't alone. Jack stood in the library doorway in his shirt sleeves, no jacket, no ceremony about it, with a book of his own and the expression of a man who had just discovered his reading spot was occupied. They looked at each other. "I can go," she said. "I was here at this hour for 11 years before you arrived," he said. "But you can stay." He sat in the chair across the room. They read in silence for an hour and a half. It was, Olivia thought, the most comfortable she had felt since she arrived. It became a pattern. Not arranged, never discussed, just a thing that happened. Library, evenings, 2 chairs at opposite ends of the room, 2 books, a fire when the nights grew cold. He hummed sometimes when he was thinking, a low, tuneless sound, 3 or 4 notes repeated. She suspected he didn't know he did it. She didn't mention it. One evening she looked up from her book to find him watching her, and instead of looking away, he said simply, "Your parents, did they ever tell you how they knew the king before me?" She went still. "My parents died when I was 12. "I know." A pause. He turned his book over in his hands, closed now, his full attention on her. "My father knew them. Your father served under him in the Northern Campaign. He called your father the bravest man he'd ever seen, wolfless or otherwise." The word hit her like a quiet shock. Wolfless or otherwise. "I didn't know that," she said. "My father made sure your family was provided for after." Jack's voice was even. "When he died and I took the throne, I continued it, anonymously." He looked at her carefully. "You thought the stipend came from the Pack Council." She had. She'd never questioned it. She stared at him. "Why didn't you ever?" "Because it wasn't about being known." He said it plainly, without performance. "Your father earned it. That was enough." Olivia looked down at her hands. She thought about the 12-year-old herself, learning her parents were gone, being left alone in a house with Maria and a grief neither of them knew how to carry. She thought about the Pack Council funds that had kept them housed, fed, intact. She had thanked the council formally every year since she was old enough to write a letter. She had been thanking the wrong person. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you deserve to know who has been in your corner," he said, "even when you couldn't see them." She pressed her wrist to her forehead, the old habit, the small room she built inside herself against hard things. He noticed. He'd noticed before, she realized. She'd seen him clock it without reacting, cataloguing it the way he catalogued everything. "What does that mean?" he asked quietly. That. She looked down at her own hand. My father used to do it, before something difficult. She paused. I started doing it after he died. I think I was trying to keep a piece of him. Jack said nothing, but something in the room changed, an almost imperceptible softening, like a window opened somewhere, letting in night air. He would have liked knowing you turned out the way you did, Jack said at last. He worried about what would happen to you. Olivia felt tears arrive without warning. Not the collapsing kind, the quiet kind. The kind that came when someone said the thing you hadn't known you needed to hear. She blinked them back. You cried once, she said, needing to redirect. Just now, you almost... I did not, Jack said, firmly. Your voice did something. My voice does nothing. It did something. The silence that followed was somehow warmer than the silence before it. That night, Olivia went to sleep easier than she had in years. And in the space between waking and dreaming, she heard it for the first time. A voice. Female. Deep and calm and very, very old. It said only, "There you are." Regret, Olivia had noticed, looked different on different people. On some people it looked like sadness. On others, anger. On Davies, it looked like arrival. The slow, dawning expression of a man who had travelled some distance in the wrong direction and had only just looked up to notice. She began to see it on his face, everywhere. She was in the middle of her sword forms when she heard footsteps on the path and looked up to find Davies standing at the garden's edge, watching her the way Jack had watched her from the ridge. Except Davies didn't have Jack's stillness. He had the particular energy of someone bracing. She finished her form before she acknowledged him. Olivia? He stepped into the garden, hands at his sides, not aggressive, just open, exposed. You look well? I am well. She lowered her blade, not unkindly but not warmly. Did you need something? He looked like that answer cost him something. I wanted to explain. You don't have to, she said. I know I don't have to. A flash of something genuine crossed his face. I want to. What I did at the ceremony, how I framed it, what I said. I wasn't trying to publicly... Davies. Her voice was gentle. That surprised him. She could see it. I know you didn't do it to be cruel. You did it because you were in love with someone else, and you didn't know how to simply say so. She tilted her head, which is a very human thing to be bad at. He stared at her. You're not angry. She considered this, honestly. I was, she said. I'm not anymore. A beat. I'm something else now. She couldn't entirely name what something else was, but it had taken up residence in the same chest that once held a guttering candle flame, and it was considerably more stable. Davies watched her face, as if trying to identify what had changed. You seem different, he said, finally. Since... He didn't finish. Since your brother claimed me. He looked away. You're happy. It came out quieter than anything else he'd said, less observation than confession. She thought about library evenings and morning tea outside her door. She thought about a man who hummed without knowing it and told her things she deserved to know. She thought about a voice in the space between sleeping and waking that said, "There you are," like she had always been expected. I'm getting there, she said honestly. She heard them before she reached the corner. Davies's voice, lower than usual, pressed tight. She was mine to... She was never yours. Jack's voice. Quiet, exact, a blade handled safely. You held her hand in a courtyard while you were already falling for someone else. That's not a claim. That's a performance. You could have waited. You could have spoken to me first. I waited long enough. Silence. Long enough. Olivia stood with her back flat against the corridor wall, not breathing. You've been watching her for years, Davies said, and it wasn't quite an accusation, but close. Haven't you? No answer, which was its own answer. You discarded what I treasure. Jack's voice, still quiet, still even. We have nothing further to discuss about it. Footsteps. She pressed further into the wall recess as Jack passed without seeing her, his face arranged in its usual controlled composure, but his hands, at his sides, were very still. The deliberate stillness of a man managing something he does not intend to show. She watched him walk away down the corridor and felt something shift in her chest, large and slow and irrevocable, like a tide changing. He's been watching her for years. You discarded what I treasure. I waited long enough. She pressed her wrist to her forehead, her father's gesture, her inherited armor, and she thought, for the first time, I don't need this as much as I used to. Loving someone, Olivia was learning, didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived the way the dawn did, gradually, inevitably, so that one morning you looked up and the whole sky had changed, and you couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it happened, only that it had, and the world looked different now, and going back to dark felt impossible. She found him on the east terrace long after midnight, standing at the balustrade and looking out over the dark grounds with the posture of a man who was very tired and had nowhere to put it. He didn't hear her approach. She was quiet when she wanted to be. She stood beside him and looked out at the same darkness. "Bad evening," she said. "Council disagreed with my border decision, unanimously." A pause. "They were wrong." "Are you certain?" "Completely." Another pause. "Mostly." She almost smiled. They stood in comfortable quiet for a moment. Below, the grounds were silver dark under a partial moon. Somewhere in the forest something moved. A deer maybe, or a young wolf running night patrol. "Do you actually like any of them?" she asked. "The council." He considered this with genuine seriousness. "Aldrich, the second chair. He tells me when I'm wrong instead of when I'm right." "That's a very specific quality to value." "It's the only quality worth valuing in an advisor." She looked at his profile in the dark, the strong jaw, the particular line of his brow when he was thinking, the 3 notes he'd started humming without realizing, low and tuneless, which she now associated so completely with him that she heard them sometimes in quiet rooms when he wasn't there. "Jack," she said. He turned. "I heard you and Davies," she said, simply, without apology. "In the corridor, 2 weeks ago." She watched something move across his face, a brief recalculation, deciding what to do with this. "Then you know more than you probably should," he said carefully. "Tell me the rest of it," she said. A long moment. "I saw you train for the first time when you were 18. He said it to the dark grounds, not to her, the way confessions are easier when you're not quite facing them. "The day your wolf didn't come. Every pack girl your age had retreated inside, or was being consoled, or was trying to perform dignity." He turned his glass in his hand, his tell, the small rotation. You went to the training yard and ran drills for 4 hours. Olivia was very still. I thought, he said, that was the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen a person do. A pause. I've thought so ever since. Why didn't you? You were 18 and devastated, and I was the Alpha King who was supposed to be impartial. His voice was controlled, but not cold, and then Davies spoke first, and He stopped, started again. I thought if he made you happy, that was enough. Did you believe that? No, he said without hesitation, not for a single day. She turned to face him fully. He was already looking at her. I'm not Davies, he said. I don't say things easily. I don't make courtyard declarations. I'm going to get the council wrong sometimes. And I hum when I'm thinking, and I know, she said. I'm not. Jack. Gently. I know. She reached up and did something she had been unconsciously deciding for some time. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart, feeling the steady beat of it under her hand. He went completely still, not the controlled stillness she'd learned to read. Something else. The stillness of a man who has stopped breathing because the thing he's been afraid to want is happening, and he doesn't know yet if it's real. I don't need declarations, she told him quietly. I need exactly this. Her hand against his chest, his heartbeat, real and present. I need someone who brings bread and doesn't make it a gesture. Someone who stands next to me without performing it. She held his gaze. I need you. He raised his hand and covered hers, slowly, carefully, the way you cover something precious, pressing it more firmly against his chest. I've loved you, he said quietly, since an 18-year-old girl went to an empty training yard and refused to fall apart. She kissed him, or he kissed her. Afterward, she couldn't be certain who moved first, only that the distance closed and his arms came around her with the same quality as everything he did, certain and unhurried and completely without performance. And she felt, for the first time in her adult life, entirely, structurally safe. Not the way you feel safe when danger is absent, the way you feel safe when you are exactly where you are meant to be. She walked back to her room near 1 a.m, and she stood at her window and looked out at the grounds, and she was smiling before she realized it. She picked up a bundle of lavender from the sill. She finally remembered why she'd been buying it. Her mother had kept lavender in every room, for calmness, for peace, for the particular quality of the air in a home that felt like home. She set it back on the sill and went to sleep. And in the space between waking and dreaming, her wolf opened both eyes. It began as a sensation. That was the only word Olivia had for it at first. Sensation. Like waking up in a body that had been asleep at a frequency she couldn't previously detect. Colours were sharper. The air had texture. The forest at dawn didn't just look different. It communicated, the way music communicates, without language, but with absolute clarity. Jack noticed before she mentioned it. He always noticed. You're favouring your left side, he said one morning at the library window. Not from injury, from something internal. She looked at her own hand. I can feel the wind change direction, she said, from inside a room. He looked at her carefully. Sit down, he said. The elder arrived at Jack's request, carrying a worn leather case of documents that he set on the library table with the reverence of someone who had been waiting to open them. He was very old, silver-haired, slow-moving, with eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He was surprised now. He spread the documents across the table. Ancient pack records, genealogical scrolls, moon ceremony registers dating back 400 years. And his finger traced a line of script that had been written in ink that had faded to the colour of rust. "The delayed wolf," he read. "A wolf bound by prophetic fating, emerging not at maturity, but at the moment of true bond formation." He looked up. There are 3 recorded instances in our entire written history. Olivia stared at the page. "A wolf that waits," Jack said slowly, "until the correct mate is found." "Until the fated mate," the elder corrected gently. "The moon goddess, in certain cases, delays the emergence specifically to prevent a premature bond." He looked at Olivia over the edge of the parchment. "Your wolf was never absent, child. It was waiting." The room was very quiet. Olivia pressed her wrist to her forehead and stopped. She lowered her hand deliberately, slowly, and held it open in her lap. Her father's habit, her armour. She didn't need it like she used to. "Waiting," she repeated. "For what?" The elder smiled, small and certain. "For him," he said simply. She felt it building for 3 days before it happened, a deep, tidal pressure, like something vast, slowly filling a space that had been empty so long she'd forgotten it was there. Jack stayed close, not hovering, never hovering, just present. At the end of the evening, at her shoulder in the mornings, the warm, solid fact of him, like a fixed point. She woke before dawn on the 7th day and went to the courtyard without knowing why. Knew why the moment the cold air hit her. It's time. She had no other word for certainty. It moved through her like a bell struck, clear and total. Jack came out 5 minutes later. He had learned, somehow, to read her the way she'd learned to read him. The micro-adjustments, the small tells, the way a person's presence changes when something momentous is happening inside them. He stood beside her. She breathed in. The shift, when it came, was nothing like the stories. No violence, no howling pain, no theatrical collapse. It was more like a door opening, like a room inside her that had always been there, always furnished, always waiting, finally unlocking. And her wolf stepped through it. She felt her, enormous and silver white and ancient in ways that had nothing to do with age. Felt her awareness settle into Olivia's own, like 2 rivers meeting, perfectly matched in temperature, in current, in direction. "There you are," said the voice she'd been hearing in dreams. "There you are," she answered. She was crying. She realised this distantly, the way you realise weather. Jack's arm came around her, not to hold her up because she didn't need that, just to be there, his chin against her temple. The 3 soundless notes he hummed when he was thinking, so soft she felt them more than heard them. "Hello," she whispered to her wolf. The silver-white presence inside her stretched, the way a creature stretches after very long sleep, and pressed back warmly, recognisably, like recognition moving in both directions at once. Jack had not announced anything. He didn't need to. Word travelled in wolf kingdoms faster than heralds, and by the 3rd morning after Olivia's wolf awakened, the pack grounds were full. The ceremony field, the royal pavilion, the hillside overlooking the kingdom's central ground. Every space that could hold a person was holding one. They stood together at the pavilion's edge, Jack and Olivia side by side, and she looked out at the gathered faces and felt something she had no word for that was larger than pride and older than joy. She saw Davies near the back of the crowd. He was watching her with an expression she recognized, the face of a man making peace with a truth he arrived at too late. He didn't look angry. He looked finished. He raised one hand, barely, a small, private acknowledgement. She nodded. Done. And done without cruelty. There was room for that. She saw Maria closer in, forced here by obligation. Council members' presence was expected at formal royal gatherings. Her sister's face was a study in the particular fury of someone watching a prediction fail spectacularly. Nobody wants you. Olivia looked at her sister and felt nothing terrible. Not love, not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever completely. But the absence of the wound, the scar where the cut used to be. She looked away. Jack's hand found hers at her side, not for the crowd, not for performance. Just his hand and hers, intertwined, warm and certain. He leaned slightly down to speak near her ear, his voice pitched for only her. Ready? She thought about 22 years of empty training yards and borrowed lavender and a tiny flame she'd kept burning through everything. She thought about a library and evening quiet and the sound of 3 tuneless notes. She thought about a wolf who had been waiting all along for exactly the right door to open. Yes, she said. Jack straightened and faced the gathered kingdom, and his voice carried the way it always carried, not loud, but total, filling every space. People of the northern ridges. He paused, the way he always paused, before something that mattered. My queen. 2 words, that was all. But the crowd moved like a tide, a slow collective bow, heads dropping, wolves going to their knees, a wave of acknowledgement that started at the front and travelled all the way back up the hillside and over it, into the forest, into the kingdom, into the future. Olivia stood in the morning light and let it happen. She didn't press her wrist to her forehead. Her hand stayed at her side, intertwined with Jack's. She didn't need the armour anymore. She had survived everything that tried to break her, and on the other side of it, not despite the breaking attempts, but somehow, because she had refused them, she had become something she could not have predicted. She had become exactly, precisely, herself. And herself, it turned out, was someone the moon goddess had been planning for a very long time. Maria had said, "Nobody wants you." She said it to a wolfless girl in a blue dress who trained alone after everyone left and kept lavender on her windowsill and pressed her wrist to her forehead when the world was hard. She said it like it was fact. It was not. Under the morning light of the northern ridge, with her silver-white wolf fully awake inside her, and the Alpha King's hand in hers, and a kingdom bowing before her, Olivia Vayne understood 3 things she had been working toward her entire life. She was never unwanted. She was never broken. She was never destined for the prince. She was destined for the king. And her wolf, ancient, silver-white, patient beyond all understanding, opened its eyes completely and smiled. Thank you for listening to Olivia's story. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and share this story to your loved ones.